Welcome to another empowering episode of Strive 365, your go-to source for conquering life's challenges and thriving no matter the odds. Whether you're seeking mental, physical, emotional, or spiritual growth, we're here to help guide you toward a better life. I'm your host, Justin Arnold, coming to you from the amazing Rockbox studio here in Rochester, New York. Today, we welcome Mike Moulton. He's a heart attack survivor and a personal development junkie and corporate recruiter. Now, Mike's journey from overcoming a heart attack to thriving in a global company alongside running a half marathon and earning 2 master's degrees as a high school dropout embodies resilience and transformation, things that we talk about on this show. He's passionate about spiritual and emotional intelligence, and his insights on betrayal trauma, personal growth, and building meaningful relationships are invaluable. So join us as Mike shares his empowering morning routines, love for reading, and all kinds of things here on Strive 65. So Mike, anything you'd like to add there to that introduction, or anything you'd like to start chatting about before I drill you with the questions? No,
No, I really appreciate the time. Been looking forward to this. I know the first time we had it scheduled, I actually had a issue that I had to go back to the hospital for. And it's been quite a journey. But when I heard the introduction and you sent it to me previously, I was like, who's he talking about?
I'm going to sneak in here and get you.
Oh.
It happens. Yeah, I'm real close. I like to almost make out with my mic, and most people are like,
gotcha.
Hello. No, you go ahead.
No, I was like, who's he talking about? Like, who is this guy? I look forward to meeting him and then realizing, oh, he's talking about me.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it was like we were scheduled and then here you are living it. And I think that's the best part, for me, example, my second book, a lot of it was past stories, but I recently released an episode here. If you haven't caught it, go watch it, listen to it. But just, I think that's the best stories is when you're actually living it. And not that it's always that way 24/7. I mean, you need to figure out how to navigate, but it's easy, I think, to do the work when life is easy. Mm-hmm. It's hard to do the work when life is hard. So continue.
No, I think that what you're doing, when you introduce what this podcast is all about and you asked me to be on it, where you talk about spirituality, emotional growth, the various ways of just growing as a person, it fell in line with who I am and, who your listeners might be. So I figured that it would be a great opportunity to come in and just, talk with you, talk with your listeners, and really present, something that, maybe comes through me. Maybe they've heard it before. This is something that I've come to, understand is that, like, when I think about coaching, I think about, life coaching, I think about just interacting with others, we really focus in on, like, what can I bring to the table? And I actually had those, they're almost imposter syndrome type thoughts, right? Like, what do I have to add to any of this that's not already been added to? And the point that I came to was that me being introduced into that stream of thought for other individuals, like nobody has the experience that I have as I have it in life. And so when I present things from the way that I've experienced maybe similar things that people have gone through, but because of who I am and my, my background and how I have my worldview and those types of things, the way that I engage the things around me is so different and helpful to others. And that's for everybody. Like, so many times we don't think we have anything to offer because, oh, well, that, that's already saturated with so many people in that space. But the point that I'm making is that we have something to add because of our individuality and how we interact with the things that happen to us and the way it just, goes out to the world.
Yeah. And I think while we might have some similar experiences, each of our stories are unique. What I found unique about yours is just everything. You've had a heart attack, you've had a challenging divorce, and I know people can relate to that. You're not the first person to have a heart attack. You're not the first person to have a divorce, but your story and how you've overcome it could really help some others. It could even help people who are still in relationships and marriages that are trying to save it, and your stuff could provide that. And just simply sharing your story. Does everybody need to write a book? Does everybody need to become a coach or make it a profession? No, but I think everybody at some capacity needs to open up, even if just to themselves. I mean, especially men, right? Like, how many men just keep that hidden inside? I mean, especially, probably our parents,
right.
I literally just had a conversation months ago with my parents that was deep, and my dad always starts to have jokes. My mom wants to change subjects, but we finally got into it, and it started with, me forgiving them for everything. And I've told this story to you, but not really on here. And they opened up to things I've never even known, even about their childhood. And it was incredible because you could tell just the release through the phone call, like in their body language. And since then, and I asked, why have you never told me this? And the words right out of their mouth, I don't want to bother you with it. And I just said, it's bothered me for 43 years because you didn't share, because you let it out in other ways, Yep. So, and I'm not going to share that on here because my parents, I think, did the best job. I really do believe that my parents did the best job. I'm not here to knock them. I'm here to love them, because at the end of the day, I really, truly believe that. But go on, continue, because I know you got similar stuff. Like you said, your heart attack, you've been through some emotional trauma. You've been, thriving even through these. Just recently, why we had to reschedule this. So why don't you share some of that experience and talk about your resilience through all that and overcoming it? Yeah,
I think if I begin my resilience story, it really starts when I was 5 and experiencing my dad leaving. Coming home from school as a 5-year-old, walking into the house and watching your father packing the car and then driving off. And at that point, you don't know what your life is going to look like. I didn't know what my life was going to look like. I didn't even know how to process it. How do you process, somebody who's so significant in your life? Like, he was my hero at that time.
That hero complex.
Yeah. All of a sudden, boom, gone. And now, I'm an only boy growing up with 3 women around me. How do I navigate life? Well, I had a great grandfather who was, a grandfather who was great to me, and he really took me under his wing and everything like that. But, I wasn't always resilient. I didn't know how to navigate that at that time. But as I grew up, I fell in love with the sport of wrestling, and wrestling to me was almost like a savior at the time, because what I, got into with wrestling was resiliency. Like, how do you get through 6 minutes of the worst possible, pain? It's in your heart, it's in your mind, it's in your body, it's your lungs. Like, everything is just being crushed. But you're working through it. I was working through it, and everything focused on becoming a better wrestler. I went all summer long, I went to wrestling camps. I ran, I went to, they had open gym. I'd go wrestle. I'd go to other schools. So this story of resilience really began with, I think, my dad leaving, and then going into my high school years of really embracing wrestling. And then there came a time when all of that dropped out because, there were things going on in my family, and I made poor choices, and I dropped out of high school. So now, I drop out of high school, and I kind of self-sabotaged, right? So I have these two things going on. I'm being trained internally, through wrestling, through resilience, but then I'm still self-sabotaging. I was voted the captain of the wrestling team. This year was going to be my year. And then I get into doing drugs, right? I get into smoking weed, tripping on acid, hanging out with people I shouldn't have been hanging out with. Dropped out of high school, done. My senior year. And then one day I'm out partying, and I have a Christian experience. I have an experience that God really saved me from this group of people. And I ended up starting to go to church at that point, and really my life's trajectory started changing. Now, at that point, I didn't know what personal growth was, but I was always on a personal growth journey, You know what I mean? Like I was always trying to get better,
trying to be a better human. Before
better
it was
human.
labeled, it's like you
Exactly.
knew that. I mean, that was me for, I mean, the majority of my life. I talk about this in my first book, and just being at age 12. And since age 12 is like, yeah, I still had hurdles and all these things, and I still do to this day. But, you know, it was always knowing that to pick myself essentially back up and to move a step forward, even if it's only one step. Like 1% better is now something I coin. And I don't want you to continue, but yeah, I mean, we relate. I mean, I did wrestling too until I tore my rotator cuff, and then was starting to find my identity after that, because I thought I was going to be this like championship wrestler because I was on my way. And I can relate on just physicality, like the aggression of wrestling. As you said, wrestling was a savior. And then you talk about the hero complex. I just literally had a conversation, a deep one, with somebody about this recently. Who was your hero? Like many people, it's like their father, their parents. And I never really thought about it because I couldn't find one. I was one of these, I felt weird because I never put posters up on my wall growing up as a kid. You know, like a lot of people had famous things. I love music, but I never like idolized anybody. I grew up Catholic, but I've told this story before, so I won't tell it necessarily again. But I didn't believe in God or a Jesus for so long, and my dad fell short in so many ways, and early on was abusive. So not him. You know? In fact, one of my abusers, I realized when I was having this conversation, oh my God, I idolized one of my abusers for so long. That was my hero. And it was weird for me to like come to that realization. And I'm only sharing that because it's like, we can't put anyone really on a hero complex. We have to almost be our own hero. Why I have gone to spirituality. I know everybody's beliefs are different, but for me, humans are always going to fall short. Yep. And we can all help to idolize, to put him up on a pedestal. So that's like, for me, that's why I like Jesus. Like he's my hero, right? Like, you know, to have something bigger beyond and people that question me on that or say something is like, maybe I'm wrong, but if you read about him, say he's a mythical creature or whatever, if you follow him compared to a human, I'd still rather follow him is how I am like, whatever. So, but continue with your story, man. It's such a beautiful thing. Oh, one other thing I want to say, you said when you were 5, where this all started. I just think it's so interesting if we choose, because you talked about your personal growth. I think it's so interesting how if we choose, our experiences in our youth can become lessons and education later in life, right? Like definitely. If we see that, like they're part of our journey, they're part of our story, but we have to see, we can't have the, purpose through pain. Not to bring that up again, but it's just like, we can't look at our stories as woe is me or try to ignore them. We got to like grow from them, through them, embrace them. And it's like a sculpture. Like we're like a sculpture, right? That's a good way to look at it, I think. And like you're being sculpted through the pain, through the adversity, some of the good moments too, all of it. It's like creating this ultimate piece of art. So
it is. Yeah. It's a continual process of growth over time, and for me, when I got to that place where I had that Christian experience, I was a high school dropout, didn't know what I could do, right? And so then someone said, hey, you should get your GED. And I was like, all right, cool. So I went in and I took the test, got my GED. And then I was working in some factories about a year later. And I'm like, these people are miserable. These people are miserable. So this is roughly about 4 years after I get out of high school. And I mean, my manager was a drunk, I was spot welding and he would throw metal across the room.
Good example for a leader, right? Like, here you go. This is how I lead.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, these people are miserable. So I applied to 2 schools. I applied to a Bible college and I applied to SUNY Brockport. I didn't get accepted into the Bible college. SUNY Brockport accepted me. So what I did is I went to SUNY Brockport and I ended up locking myself into the library, like from the time dinner ended every day to 11 o'clock at night. I was in the library reading, doing my homework, doing everything I had applied to wrestling. I'd put it into my studies. And the crazy thing is my high school coach had ended up retiring from high school coaching, went to SUNY Brockport and was an assistant coach there, found me in the library and asked me to come join the team. And I told him I can't, because everything I put into my wrestling, I need to put in the schooling now. And I just had a vision for myself. I knew I was going to move forward. I knew I was gonna do
How old
something
were
else.
you then again?
At that point, I was 22.
Impressive, man. I sure didn't have visions, or I knew I wanted to do better, but man, that's an impressive way to just look at life. So I applaud you for that.
Thank you. You know what? The way I look at some of these things is like, I don't have an option. So I didn't have an option.
Yeah. So I can relate to that for sure. Yeah.
I was either going to be in factories the rest of my life, or I was going to take control through education and move forward in the directions where I was led.
So I think I did that. I just never consciously thought it. The way you explain that. Yeah. I mean, I look back and, I'm from suburbs of Chicago. We moved to Western Illinois, and I knew I didn't want the life that I was seeing. And I knew I didn't want to go back there. So I went to school like in Kentucky. I've never been to Kentucky. Like I chose Kentucky. Right. I did get scholarships and things, but yeah. And then even my degree, like I went into music hoping that I could travel the world as like a musician or something was my original dream for those that don't know. So yeah. Glad you said that, because I don't know if I ever thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but then I made choices after that. I decided to join the military. Went to the military, went to San Antonio. I believe that was serendipitous for me because I met some of the greatest people I've ever known in my life, heroes of mine, good friends of mine. I lost a mentor. He had passed away of a heart attack at 48. And then we ended up, I met my wife, my ex-wife now, but my wife down there. And then we ended up moving back here. And then what opened up for me was through the post 9/11 GI Bill, I was able to go and get my master's degree. And I did that in divinity, thinking I was going to go become a pastor. And in the meantime, I was doing different jobs and stuff like that. So I made a pivot. I was actually doing a lot of back office stuff because I did military intelligence work. And so I went for like computer jobs, and I hated them. Couldn't do it. Didn't like it. Was like, I'm not going to be stuck in this. And I ended up getting like a call center job.
I was going to ask, why do you think that was? Why did you hate that?
Oh, because I like to be with people. I mean, and I should have known that, but you know what? I needed to support my family. I had a family of 5.
You got to go through it. You got to experience and know, and then you got to wrestle with the thoughts. Is this resistance in a good or bad way?
Right.
So, yeah.
Not knowing any of those words, I was just being led by the Lord,
Faith, man. Exactly. Faith. That's why you need it, because it helps in so many ways.
Yep. And so I ended up truthfully, I was doing credit card processing and point of sale solutions and going every door, every floor. And one day I'm walking out of a place and I'm like, I wonder if I can sell jobs. My cousin, and where the context of that comes from is my cousin had a recruiting firm for 20 years at that time. And I had seen that he had a recruiter role open. And so I had messaged him and I was like, hey, Joe, can I, come and recruit for you? He said, well, let's talk. So we talked. He hired me full commission, like just everything I had, everything that, I basically earned every dime, and through every closed role. So job posting, close it, I'd make $500 a pop, something like that. So I basically went from zero to now, I'm working for a global company, less than 10 years later. It's, I'm at the 10-year mark now, but it took me 4 years to get to Xerox. And then, it took me 3 years to get to Xerox. And then I was there for 3 years, and then COVID and a bunch of stuff happened.
So with your corporate role and someone that's deeply involved in, the personal development side of things and how do you integrate that into your professional life? Like, how do you use your platform? How do you use it to inspire others in your career path? Yeah,
that's a good question. Because on LinkedIn and stuff like that, I am essentially I work for Visa Corporation. So I am a Visa recruiter. And so when I'm on that platform, everything is Visa and everything comes from the recruitment side of things. So I don't do anything for coaching over in that side. Instagram, however, is the side where I do all of my coaching stuff. So in Facebook, but I have two separate identities. I have recruiter Mike and I have coach Mike. However, how I integrate it is, I take my strengths. So I took in one of my master's degrees, I had to take like a strengths finder. I had to take all of that. And so I took my strengths of relationship building, a learner, and then also optimism is one of them. And so is like, it's called woo, but that's actually like, really influencing people. So I take all of that and I use them on both sides. So the integration of Mike, me, is on both platforms in my two different, ways of doing it. So like I feel fully integrated on Instagram and I feel fully integrated on LinkedIn.
No, I get it. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Do you use it in your professional life, like with colleagues or anything of that sort, or even customers or people you might interact?
Well, I don't have customers. I have candidates that across the world. But yeah, I mean, I blog there. I have what's called Wisdom Wednesdays, and that's where I just kind of share something. I was trying to do like three blogs a week, but it was just too much. And with what I've come to the conclusion is I need to oversee the stressors in my life. And it was stressing me out to do 3 blogs. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do one a week and I'm going to do it really good. And that's what I'm going to focus on.
Yeah. I mean, I've navigated those paths and I think a lot of people have, you need to see, you need to feel out like, for example, I know somebody right now who's trying to do almost too much good and he even like within his own home and he's got a family, but then by trying to help a good friend, it's putting the rest of his family in danger. And it's like, it's like that in anything else. For me, same idea. I run a gym, I've written books and people are like, how do you do it all? Well, it's all under the umbrella of like health and wellness.
Right.
I only, for example, put out 2 podcasts a month. Because I'm not going to, for example, you're not going to write 3 blogs. You chose one, but we got to figure out and navigate, where we can bring the most value. But also, we need to think about ourselves first.
Yep.
Like that's where the selfish, selfless stuff comes. Because if we really want to help people, and we've talked about this on here before, and you can as well if you want to go deeper on your story. But it's just like I see this still to this day. People who got the biggest hearts, right?
Yep.
Like parents especially, but they let themselves go in so many ways. So they really can't give themselves to be the best capacity. But I realize, for example, like things that I do that my kids see me do and now they get it and they do themselves are, I told you when I came in, man, it was a long weekend. So I'm going to take a break. And they might come in and they know that daddy's meditating now. It took a while, but they know to walk away. But they're starting to meditate too and seeing the value of it.
Right.
Because kids are sponges. So same thing, you need to know, where's your mental capacity to be the biggest giver. Right. Yep. And it sounds like you found that, which is so great. Like, how do you, with everything you've been through, I know we kind of touch on this, but I think we can go deeper because it's like you've been through a lot. So how do you take a pause, have the self-awareness and the reflection to know when you're being tugged too much or giving too much?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, the scriptures, Jesus said, you got to, love others as you love yourself. And so priority is if I can't love myself well, then I'm not going to be able to love others well. And the way that I love others is by being my best self in a situation or bringing my best self to work, bringing my best self to my family, bringing my best self to, my significant other, those types of things. So it's, it really for me, it's allowing myself to see I have a spiritual director. He's an old Catholic monk, and he has this phrase that I love. You have to see yourself coming at yourself. And so what he means is like essentially being self-aware, right? So are you self-aware enough to know this is going to trigger me? Am I enough aware to know this is going to harm somebody else if I say this, if I do this? What is going to be their response if I do this? So I started living with more empathy. I started thinking through like, what are the causes of my actions? And it really culminated with like when I found out like infidelity changed me innately. Now you can go in one of two ways with infidelity. When someone betrays you, you can go really angry, or you can become like focused in on getting better.
So you're saying you have two choices.
I think you have several, but the main choice is yes. There's a few directions. You can kill someone too.
No, I mean, yes, but there's good, bad. Like, yes, there's multiple. I'm just trying to, I wanted to pause there just so listeners could follow, like, because our brains can get scrambled in stressful situations. That's how I look at it, because we've all been there, right? It just becomes this mess. And another way I'd like to say it, we can either react or we can respond. And a response is probably going to be a much more intelligent way of doing it. Like and I'll think back to hockey since it's a sport. Like nowadays you can either have a left stick or a right stick. There is no neutral stick like there used to be anymore. So anyways, continue.
No, and I think, one of the things that, we can either respond or react. But when you're going through harmful things, right? Sometimes you're going to react and you're going to present the worst of yourself. I did 100%. When I found out about everything, angry to the core, like to the points of like wanting to harm myself, take my own life.
Yeah.
So the reactions are real and they're in the moment. And what happens is we grow in our resilience, emotional resilience, by allowing ourselves to go through that and giving ourselves empathy first.
Yeah. And I think, I want to say this, just so we're clear, I'm not saying you should always respond. Sometimes you need to react. Like if your child's about ready to like fall off of, if you're hiking, you need to react. You can't say, well, I wonder what would happen if no, you got to react. Like there's moments where you can react and respond. But when it comes to like what you said, like emotional intelligence, it's about a growth period. So yes, if you're fighting, let's bring it down to that. If you're fighting with your partner, you can either, instead of trying to win the battle, which I always say in these kinds of fights, both parties lose if you continue, or you can respond knowing that, I've been in these, let's be honest, like I love my wife dearly, and just like any healthy marriage or any marriage in general, there's going to be some, arguments, fights, call it what you will. Nothing physical between us, by the way, so nobody call anyone. But like we've had some arguments, and I've learned that sometimes it's better to just shut my mouth before I say something stupid. And with that said, there's been moments, not anything recently, but where she's wanted to, and I'm saying this only because I know people can relate, just like why we're here today. And why won't you say anything? Those words. And I know that like why she's doing that. So I just will keep my mouth shut, because even though she's mad at me in the moment, if I say something, it can make things even worse. So I'd rather come back to the table, and it always comes back better every single time that we come back and talk about it, whether it's an apology or whether it's just like, we realize at the end of the day, we both realized we were super heated and trying to win an argument always. Right. Like, and then it always comes back stronger and our relationship is better. And that's what I love about my wife. We always come back to, after anything, whatever we've been going through, like we always come back and we collect and we connect and we grow. And so I challenge people in those instances is where you want to respond.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
yeah, definitely. And, when you're going through, difficult times, what's going to come out, right? Like Oswald Chambers talks about being broken bread and poured out wine. And what he means in that statement, if you ever, Utmost for His Highest is a devotional that I used to really dive into. But the concept is that what cuts you will, basically produce something that comes out of you. And in the time of, when I was dealing with betrayal trauma, or even when I was dealing with my heart attack, like two different ways of how I responded and how I reacted drew out something totally different. Like I was trying to hold on to something that was dead, right?
Yeah.
Keeping it alive. And on the other side, I was trying to stay alive, like literally. And so when I was interacting with those things, there was two different, like there were things going on. Like my childhood of, my dad leaving was impacting how I dealt with my situation in my marriage. So it was impacting that. But by God's grace, I had already started counseling and that type of stuff. So I was able to begin to dig deep. And the amazing thing is that once I started dealing with going back to my 5-year-old self and dealing with the loss of my father, then I became stronger over time. It took me about 18 months from the day that I call D-Day, is the day that like I learned about the infidelity that was going on in my marriage, to 18 months later is when I was able to walk away. I wasn't strong enough. It took time. But there is a total difference when I dealt with my heart attack. Like it was like I went into all that culmination, right, of everything I dealt with emotionally, physically during that time, kind of culminated in that heart attack. And the way I describe it is that I went in and I died and I rose again. Like I essentially look at this part of my life now since my heart attack is a resurrection. And so now that's why, like, if you look at it, I think I've done more up to after the heart attack in the last year, year and a half from that than I did prior to, just because I know that time is of an essence.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about that too, because people don't see the time, that goes into this. They're like, so people don't fully understand. They hear the end result. I mean, it's just like any championship story of an athlete or anything. You don't know the story that built it. Like, and then the Afterfall, right? That's was the prime motivator for my first book. And somebody recently asked me that, like, what, I was on a podcast, this wasn't on mine. And they asked me, what was the motivator? It was literally, it started with people asking, but the final straw was the week where I finally penned to paper was I had 5 different people make these assumptions or make these statements that I've had a good life, that I've always been genetically blessed or something, that like I've got good genes. It's easy for me to stay lean. I'm like, you have no idea. Like, you have no idea. I work my tail off. This is a daily story. Like,
yep.
And so I'm glad you brought that up because, I've even heard some of it, and you're welcome to share whatever vulnerability you want. Cause like the shirt I'm wearing today, there's strength in vulnerability, and you still to this day have that story. Like it's not like you get the divorce and you've got kids.
Right.
And so there's that, like, I don't like to use the word baggage, right? So I don't know if you have a different word for that. Cause I think I don't like that because it's like the kids and it's not baggage. That's a gift. It's just a challenge. So I don't know if there's another phrase we can make up today, but with that, it's the story continues and you've got to still show up as a father, which has got to be hard. Right. And so I'd love you to talk about that.
I think the hardest thing through that whole process was to be a father who was there for my kids when I wasn't even there for myself.
Oh, by the way, for those that are listening, he's had heart attacks. He's a relatively healthy guy. These aren't just health. I mean, they are health related, but while dealing with this, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm like, I realized I need to mention that because people are just listening to this whole time and they're just assuming it's the typical American heart attack, which maybe it is now the typical, but could you talk that and then talk about being a father in a divorce?
Well, do you want me to go into the story of how it happened?
No, it's more stress related, right?
So I do have a genetic disposition toward, my just high cholesterol and stuff like that, which I didn't catch it in time. And then on top of that, though, stress is the silent killer. Like this, I think there is the stress induced and sped up, I think the heart disease, and the just my heart being blocked, and those blockages, and it ultimately like just almost killed me.
And he just recently had an episode, just that's why we're here for the second time. So I wanted to just bring that up because, a lot of you probably don't even know from the genetic piece to the stress piece. And then all of a sudden, boom.
Right. When the thing is though, is like I was doing CrossFit for 10 years. I was dieting pretty well.
That's how we met, was in CrossFit. Like right. He's a fit guy. He's a healthy guy. He eats good. He moves a lot. He's got a good mental mindset. So it's just...
Yep. I wake up every morning and, I meditate and stuff like that. But when what happened, I believe, is when I was hit with the infidelity in my marriage, every stressful thing...
That's why I wanted to...
came culminating to the front and became front and center. And I was navigating through that. And at the same time, trying to hold a job, trying to be the best father, trying to figure out dinner. There was a few months where my ex-wife was in and out of the house. Like it just was a crazy situation. And so like, here I was trying to manage it with my kids, and I'm not showing up well anywhere. Work, I ended up getting furloughed through COVID. So like on top of finding out COVID hits, I lose this job that I had just negotiated the most money I've ever made in my life.
So life's going pretty good at this point for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Lost his job, furloughed his job.
Yep.
Losing his marriage, having stress, genetic heart attacks.
Yeah.
So finding that joy in those moments.
Well, and the thing is once I sitting there, really interacting with death does something to you. Like I was already in the trajectory of like reapplying like the things I knew, my meditation practices, my journaling. Like I was always already on a good track. And then I had my heart attack. And so when that happened, like, I was alone because you couldn't have any visitors yet. The COVID rules were still in play.
That's got to be lonely.
Oh, it was crazy.
Especially if somebody likes to be around people, as you mentioned earlier.
Well, not only that, but I didn't know if I was going to see my kids again. Right? I think those situations really come to the forefront. But when, I got through it, like, I've been able to navigate it. And I think because of the things that were put in place already, counseling, journaling, working out, like I got back to all the main things for me and not allowing, like the other thing is too, is like, I realized that I need to show up for myself before I show up for others, as we talked about earlier. And that became front and center. So I began to really think through like, what is it that I if my funeral were today, what would I want my kids to remember? That's one reason why I even started my podcast was, I was listening to a song and it talked about like, essentially, this person not remembering the voice of the individual who is most important to them. And I thought, I want my kids to remember me. I want to give them something to remember me by. So it's like, my desire isn't just to be heard and seen and known. It's essentially, I have things to say, I have thoughts to give, but I want my children to have a remembrance ultimately.
I think also, I think a better way to say it is you want them to remember you, not just to simply remember you, but to have a piece of you, a legacy of some sorts that gives them a step better than you did, right?
Exactly.
To know a little bit of that. Like, I think that poses, I wrote this down. I think it poses a great question for us all, imagine it's a tough one that, but I encourage, I'm going to do it later. So there you go. To pose that question of if you're in a hospital bed with no visitors and you only have 1 or 2 days left, what would you do? You've already pretty much answered that, but I'm asking the listeners, the viewers, we don't want to face those types of questions, and it doesn't have to be morbid. It could be joyful. Mm-hmm. It could be a bright spot. It could be, but what if we don't? For example, my wife's grandmother just passed away. They realized she didn't even have a will, and she was 92.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what you do. But I'm just giving people ideas. Like not that I don't think we walk around all day, we're going to live forever and, nothing bad is going to happen. I think we all realize we could walk out our front door and something bad could happen, but we don't do anything about it because we don't actually take the time because we're too busy in our minds to pause and reflect. And we're all guilty. I'm guilty of this. That's why that question came, and I'm going to pose that question myself and start making a list of, I've done a little bit of this, but I can always go deeper and further, like things I want to do. I mean, that's why I wrote, that's why I do the things that's why I do this podcast. My kids, my grandkids, people could pick it up. I know you do a podcast, which, we're getting there on time, but which I want to bring up, but yeah, continue, man.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing though, that, if anyone can take away something is, what are the mindsets that you're living with? What is it that drives you? What are you passionate about? That's something I ask every candidate I talk to, like, what is it that you are passionate about? What drives you on a daily basis? And you can answer the question for work. You can answer the question for family. You can answer, any way. And the other thing is like, what 3 things, if you could create, your next whatever, what are the top 3 things it would, need? If you want to create a great family experience, what are the top 3 things that you feel you need to be able to do that? If your next, step in your life, this next phase of your life, if you could create it, what top 3 things would make it great for you? You know what I mean? Stuff like that. And what it does is it really, because what I dealt with from the time I was 5 to the time that I started dealing with my wife's infidelity and moving past that, I didn't recognize it until then, but I had a victim mentality. And so when I looked at life, I looked at it through the lens of a victim rather than, and so things were happening to me, but not necessarily for me. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I get from like the personal growth. You can take, the Carol Dweck. I always talk about Carol Dweck. That's a book that really changed me. It's mindset.
You have mentioned that, in our conversations.
Is the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And the focus of it is, how can I grow through this? And how is this an opportunity that's for me and not against me? And that's the point. Like, all of the things that I went through, I began to recognize these are not against me. These are for me. These are challenges that are happening.
Yeah.
Some of them are due to my choices. Some of them aren't, but they're there. So I have to deal with the reality and then make the choice to either be a victim or look at it as an opportunity of, how can I grow? What is this for? And find the meaning in it. And I think when you begin to do that, things just begin to change.
Yeah. I mean, I at a young age turned my adversity, my trauma from it was probably pessimistic with a little optimism sprinkled in that, like, if life sucks this bad, there's got to be a point to it. Like, that's some of the words I said to myself. With that, it's growth. I gotta make a difference. I gotta move forward. This is just life, and so I'm realizing that it's just like coal has always been coal and diamond has always been an image in my head a lot, and just where diamonds are created. And so I look at that, like how and then why I'm so fascinated with art and creation. And I talked about it inadvertently at the beginning of this podcast, because, we don't realize how these things are molding us and creating us. We just have to see it. But if we fail to see it till the day we die, then we're never truly God's or whatever you believe in's greatest creation. And I also want to say that doesn't mean you have to be top of the mountain. Maybe your story is to be challenged your whole life, and then your kids to see how you work through that. Maybe it's to be a millionaire. Maybe it's to own a business. I don't know. Maybe it's just to be the best mother. Maybe your purpose is to be a best father. Maybe it's to be the best father through a divorce, and while still managing work and all these other things and trying to create a business or whatever it looks like. So, man, I think that's anything else you wanted to share on that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you got some cool feats that I want to point out. He talked about some things going on, but reading over 40 books in a year, right?
Between 40 and 60, depending on the year.
Where'd that come from? Why? And can you share how this habit is going to influence or is influencing your growth?
That's a great question.
Maybe recommend a book, but you already recommend one. So,
I think, growth mindset, start there. Where it came from was I read somewhere that CEOs read between 40 to 60 books a year.
They got more time. I'm just kidding. That's what people are saying. I already have seen it on social media. They got more time.
But what it did is it gave me the opportunity to get on par with, individuals who are higher in a corporate situation. And so I'm reading the same books they are. And so I'm able to have deeper conversations and really have good interaction with them. And I think that that's an enablement to career growth within a corporate situation.
What advice would you give? So backtrack. So for this guy's high school dropout, 2 master's degree, divorce, all these things that he's mentioned, just bringing the ADHD people up to speed here. And so with that, what would you say to somebody who's maybe got a similar struggles with education, ADHD, whatever their story or whatever the story they tell themselves is, what advice would you have for somebody to maybe they want to go into education or whatever to accomplish some feat like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have ADD. And so I have a hard time concentrating. And so what I did to overcome, exactly. What I did to overcome a lot of that was I would read a book and listen at the same time. So what I would say is, first of all, I
love doing that, by the way. I do that too. I retain it, like the Bible app I use and other things, man. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm like, I do that too. So it works.
Exactly. And the thing is, where you start, isn't where you end. That's what I always say too. So the beginning is just the beginning.
It's an ultra marathon.
It is. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And so talk about some of the other things, like your daily routine, some commitments you have to help through all these adverse moments that you're doing to strive every day.
Yeah. Good question. So it's changed. It's morphed. But essentially I work out every day. The key components are working out every day, meditating every day. I also do affirmations. I pray. I also write gratitudes, and then I sit in silence. Like the biggest improvement for me was when I would just take 15 to 30 minutes, complete silence in the dark, in the morning by myself.
Yeah, and that's something I struggled with, and I have talked on here multiple times because I think it needs to be reiterated. And I always assume that somebody might be listening to this show for the first time, and that's quieting the mind could be one of the most difficult things many of you do, but there's immense value in it. And if you're like me, I'll say that for me, it's not necessarily a daily, but it's a weekly struggle. I mean, I found it, let's see, I'm 43. In my early 30s, I started doing it, and it was like a battle. It literally was like a warring fight up there against the noise. Oh, yeah. And so for those that can relate, and I haven't shared it quite in that detail, so that's new. And it's progressively gets better and better, but there's still days where the noise wants to come in. Yep. And so it's like little skirmishes now compared to like massive Civil War type battles. And so if you have yet to do 15 and 30 minutes is a lot, but the amount of
it started at 3 minutes.
Yeah. I think mine started at 1, so not to beat you out, but I think literally that's all I maybe 30 seconds.
I think too, we have to remember also is give yourself grace and be empathetic towards yourself. Because we think that our morning routine or our routine is going to save us. That's not the point of it. It's what are the elements that you need to present your best self in this world, and then go with those. Yeah.
I love that you said that because people question me on mine. It's literally for that, to be the best self. It's not to save me. It's to guide me. Like, people say, my wife assumes I enjoy jumping in, 40-degree water every morning for 5 minutes, and I still don't like it, but I feel better afterwards, and it gives me this sense of calming because I'm forced to go into breath work and calm everything, because if you freak out, right, that's where you start to freeze. And so and there's other things I do, and that doesn't have to be your tool just because now it's super popular. I've been doing it for like 15 years. Whatever gets you to be a better human, to get up in the day.
Right.
And you share this on your platforms, and you've shared it here today. Any other little nuggets that you'd like to share like that, like, in the spirit of Strive 365, like a mantra or philosophy that you haven't really touched on in here today, whether it be daily, weekly, monthly?
That's a good question. I think for me, it would be just have empathy for yourself first, and then allow yourself the opportunity to grow at each situation that arises in your life. Like don't sit there and think that anything defines you, especially things that happen to you or things that you do that are wrong. Like those don't define you. They don't define me. What defines me is how I respond, how I grow through it. You know, what are the lessons that I learned? Those are the things that are going to define me, essentially.
Yeah. Let's talk about that real quick. Like empathy, that word I feel gets thrown around. Sympathy, empathy. I'm not one to use sympathy, especially when I learned the root of where sympathy comes from. If you want to talk on that, you can. I'll let people Google that one. But empathy, man, you know, let's just dive into that word. What does that mean?
For me, well, what it really means is being okay with not being okay. What it means is that we can look at ourselves in love rather than judgment. So it's love over judgment. It's grace over judgment. You know, it's really understanding, like seeking to understand rather than to be understood. You know, and it's and you start with yourself.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and take that away right there. I think that's a great way to end this show. You know, you have to love yourself before you can fully love others, and you can do both in the process. But man, you've got to appreciate yourself. And, you know, I like to use the term, we're all masterpieces in progress.
We are.
You know, love yourself, because if you don't, no one else can. I think that's the challenge in a lot of relationships. We're all false to this. I went into them in my 20s. We go into these things without really loving ourselves, hoping that someone will love us enough, make us feel good enough. And it always will fall short.
Right.
Every single time.
Right.
And
yeah. And I think the biggest thing for me in the change, because I strove so much to be the great husband, to be the great father, to be the great, you know what I mean? Like
prove your worth,
to
and
prove
love,
my
right?
worth. Yeah. And then when that was destroyed, that's when I began to really build. And now I feel like I'm a better person than I was even then, because I'm doing it not to be seen, but I'm doing it because this is who I am.
And this is life until your last breath. It's work, but it's good, and it could be joyful, and it'd be amazing and impactful, even if it's the best work you do is on yourself.
Exactly.
So I think that's a great way. Thank you, Mike. This has been fun. I got to know, even though we talk and we meet, and this is cool, and it was good to go on a deeper side. And if anything, I hope people that can relate and connect will reach out to Mike and also, you know, be helped. You know, maybe something resonated with you in this episode, or maybe you know somebody that it will resonate. And if so, that's the person that you need to share it with. You know, that's how this show grows. It's not for me. This isn't a show that I make money off of. It's a free service for you. So like, share, subscribe. We thank everyone as this Strive 365 podcast continues to immensely grow, especially here in 2024. We are so grateful for all of you listeners and viewers here of the show. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of Strive 365. Take care.